Okay, I'd like to call to order the Bedford Township Planning Commission regular meeting. It is October 12th, 2022. It is 7:03 p.m. If we could all stand, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item 3 roll call. Mr. Kovret, can you call the roll?
Absolutely. Mr. Swank?
Here.
Mr. Lamkowski?
Here.
Mr. Helm?
Here.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Kovret is here. Mr. Fritz?
Here.
Mr. Mahoney?
Here. Okay, we have a full commission tonight. Item 4, approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda submitted.
Support?
Support.
Mr. Fritz supports. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Approval of the minutes of September 28th, 2022.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for September 28th, 2022.
Support?
I support.
Oh, Mr. Fritz supports. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Okay, item 6, public comment, limited to 3 minutes. Just please note the open hearing is still open. You'll have a chance to talk if you're here to talk about a specific subject. Anybody have any comment to make other than what's on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 7, old business. Item A. Jody, why don't you just go ahead and read the description?
Sure. It's the continuation of the open public hearing for the request from Lock It Up Self Storage, parcel number 5802-026-07000, to revoke the planned unit development that was approved on April 19, 2005 with a minor amendment on December 7, 2005, and to rezone the parcel within the PUD from PUD planned unit development to I-1 industrial with a conditional zoning agreement. The request is to revoke and rezone the parcel is being requested as the property owner has requested to move forward to submit for site plan approval and increase development within the 14.36 acres that was required to remain as open space within the PUD in accordance with the recorded PUD that was recorded on July 28, 2005 and amended on July 28, 2006, and Article Plan Unit Development Districts of the Bedford Township General and Zoning Ordinances. The Planning Commission shall review the request and make a conditional recommendation to the Township Board in accordance with Section 400.1708A, enforcement of the Bedford Township General and Zoning Ordinances, otherwise known as 100 West Stearns Road, Temperance, Michigan. This is an open public hearing. And now Again, the applicant is Lock It Up Self Storage, 7150 West Central Avenue, location of 100 West Stearns. Zoning, PUD, plan unit development with an agricultural underlining zoning. Requested zoning is I-1. Master plan designation, agricultural preservation, approximately a 20-acre parcel. On October 13, 2021, the Bedford Township Planning Commission opened the public hearing regarding the request on the subject parcel to revoke the plan unit development and agreement and requested to rezone from PUD plan unit development to I-1. Due to the commission being 1 member short, this was continued to November 10, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. The commission was 3 members short, and at that meeting, the item was continued to November 17, 2021. On 11/17, Planning Commission was 2 members short. As the applicant was advised, the Planning Commission would be 2 members short on the December 8th. This item was continued to the December 15th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. On December 15th, the continuation of the public hearing was held. Bedford Township Planner Lucy Fort and Manikin Smith Group suggested the Planning Commission make a recommendation to the Township Board to deny the rezoning request. However, the Planning Commission recommended to the Township Board to approve and to revoke the PUD and the PUD agreement and rezone the property to I-1. And I included all those minutes and the PUD agreement in the packet. On January 4th, 2022, the item was presented to the Township Board for a decision. After discussion, the applicant representative discussed the possibility of a conditional rezoning. Attorney Goldsmith advised the Township Board this type of zoning is a contract between the Township and the property owner, which is a way to still keep protections in place to allow the Township to have control over some of the property and how it can be used for. Attorney Goldsmith noted this type of contract as requested by the landowner, and the applicant's representative withdrew the presented request. On August 24th, 2022, the Planning Commission approved a site plan for an office building conditioned upon addressing all comments and conditions of the Bedford Township Fire Department, the Manikin Smith Group, the Monroe County Drain Commission, and the Monroe County Drain Commission in regards to soil erosion and sedimentation control, to amend the PUD agreement and exhibits, submitting to the Planning Department to be reviewed and approved by the Township Attorney and the Manikin Smith, and all documents to be recorded. It was noted that should any lighting be installed in a rendering, an illumination plan must be submitted to the Planning Department for review and approval for compliance before installation. And since the packet had been presented to the Commission, I did receive updated information regarding the actual structure. It was sent to Ms. Hirschberger regarding during the floodplain questions from Eagle, for them to be able to continue to move forward with the structure. At this time, they have submitted an amended PUD, and we are in review of that language, subject to conditions moving forward. The new request, Lock It Up Self-Storage is requesting a revocation of the approved PUD plan and PUD agreement originally granted to Erie Shores Storage Facility, and has submitted for a conditional rezoning of the property to I-1 Industrial to allow for future development of 12 additional mini warehouse units, all subject to review and approval of the submitted conditional rezoning agreement and conditioned upon the site plan approval process. The submitted conditional rezoning agreement by the applicant is included in the packet and shall be reviewed and discussed in its entirety by the Planning Commission. The Planning Department, Township Planner Lucy Fortin, Manikin Smith, and Legal Counsel have reviewed the submitted conditional zoning agreement. As the Planning Commission reviews and discusses the proposed conditional zoning agreement, please take into consideration when making recommendations for the following comments. The Planning Department's comments are in item 1 of the agreement: the property shall be completely enclosed by a chain link or similar secure fence. We need to add language to include the approval of 824 for the site plan that states the fence to enclose the office building excluding the parking area and the remaining perimeter of the property to maintain a minimum of 7 feet in height and a maximum of 8 feet. Number 3, in regards to a resident manager to be allowed on site plan for an office building being approved on 8/24/2022, and no residential living quarters is being provided. On number 5, should be determined review of operation hours, 8 to 10, 7 days a week. Question was, are those office hours, or are, because the residents have access 24/7 by the gate? And number 13, as noted in the agreement, remedies, Planning Department has concerns on the language, and this item should be addressed further. I believe it should be something more restrictive within the township's control, and maybe not going to the Monroe County Circuit Court. And number 18 is noted in the proposed agreement, termination, further clarification of maybe that going hand in hand with number 13. The Township Planner, Lucy Fortin, provided her comments, and those were provided in the application. And any recommendation to the Township Board would require 2 motions: one for the conditional zoning agreement to I-1 Industrial with any comments and or additional information the Planning Commission determines, subject to site plan approval and the conditional zoning agreement and the approved site plan being recorded by the Monroe County Register of Deeds, and a motion for the revocation of the PUD and the PUD agreement. Keep in mind that the rezoning request will have to be the first determination and the second, and they must be contiguously the same, either to approve or deny, recommended.
So that before we revoke the PUD?
Yes, because if you make one motion to revoke the PUD and then there's no zoning, it goes back to agricultural, and that is not a permitted use regardless of any zoning district in the ag district. Those mini warehouses would not be permitted. Please keep in mind, per section 41702A, industrial uses shall not be allowed and shall be excluded from all PUD projects. Therefore, a recommendation to either approve or deny the rezoning request would require a consistent recommendation of approval or denial for the revocation of the PUD and the PUD agreement. As previously noted, industrial uses shall not be allowed and shall be excluded from all PUD projects, and a mini warehouse development is not permitted in an agricultural zoning district. I think that's all.
Okay.
now.
Any additional comments from the applicant? And state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, for the record, I'm Jerry Parker. My address is 1 Seagate, Toledo, Ohio. I'm an attorney and I represent the applicant. With me is our construction manager, Paul Shea, who's in-house, also Kip Van Tassel, will be the contractor for the facilities, as well as our engineer, who I submitted an amendment to our packet. I assume you all have it now with respect to floodplain and drainage and a few other issues. This project, or this process, obviously has a long history. It's about 18 months now. As been pointed out, the Planning Commission recommended approval of our rezoning request without any conditional contract with respect to zoning at the initial hearing back in December, almost a year ago. When we got to the trustees, the major concern was, okay, if we rezone this industrial, we see there's some change in conditions that might warrant that. But the problem we have, the main problem as I understood it, was it could be something else other than mini warehouses like there are there now. And so at the suggestion of your legal counsel, he said there's an enabling statute which allows Michigan townships to do something other states, including Ohio, can't do. That means restrict, even with the change of zoning, restrict the use of the property to what you want. And that's an enforceable agreement because it has and your attorneys worked very well with me, and so did your administration, to pound out this agreement, which is pretty tight and restrictive, and we have no problem with it. We didn't have one objection to it because we thought that the township's requests were reasonable, because all we want to do is put the additional mini warehouses there according with the site plan. Now, perhaps some of the people that spoke last time weren't aware of this agreement, but one of the issues was outside storage. Under this agreement, there's no outside storage permitted whatsoever. There's got to be a drainage plan, which basically one of the problems was it's flooded. Everybody here knows or should know, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, this is not prime farmland, despite the assertion that it is. 3/4 of it's underwater. It doesn't get farmed. The farmer that basically farms the rest of it, he doesn't pay us anything. He mows the lawn. So should this remain where it is, it'll be a flooded field. Secondly, as our engineer will testify, that people can build in the floodplain. The current mini warehouses are in the floodplain. You just have to do some grading issues. And lastly, there's nothing ecological or environmentally sensitive about this property. To be somewhat facetious, it's not the home of the yellow-belly sapsucker, if you know what I mean. So there's nothing unique about this piece of ground. And some of the other things I wanted to point out to you, that the restrictions, if you haven't read it, the doors to the individual storage units shall remain shut and shall not face the street. There's just a host of restrictions that we have no problem with. And if the complaint is drainage, this will substantially improve the drainage situation out there for everybody, including the adjacent property owners. Now, I know things change. I know what the 2006 agreement said, but there are changing conditions in a township. This township's a lot different than it was 17 years ago. There's a lot more homes. And because of that, there's a lot more need for self-storage. This is a valuable use, a value asset to the township residents, and that's why we're here asking for an increase in the number of units that we can build on the property. In addition to that, although now it's great, there's an increase in the tax base. You will get some revenues without, obviously, no impact on the schools. There's no children here. So, everything helps, okay? This would help that. And in addition to that, we would eliminate any flooding on adjacent property owners that they may suffer now because of the fact that we have to engineer it and spend a lot of money putting up a drainage facility that keeps everything on our property. And to buttress that, if you don't mind me having our engineer come up here, he will testify to his expert opinion on 2 or 3 issues that I talked about. Can you come up, please? Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Dennis Bell, 105 Sam Anna Drive, Bryan, Ohio. And I'm the engineer for this project for Lock It Up, Tolson Enterprises. Like Jerry said in my memo that I sent to him, the bulk of this property is in the 100-year floodplain. Part of it's above at the very northwest corner, westerly side of it is in the 500-year floodplain. But all the existing buildings are built within the floodplain. They have to be elevated to 1 foot above the 100-year flood elevation. What can't be built in easily is the floodway. The floodway is on the east side of Crab Road, so we're not touching that. When we improve a site like this, Monroe County Drain Commission requires that we go through, like Jerry said, a full study, a drainage study, and we'll have to do a detention facility to hold the increase in runoff on our property and release it at a predetermined rate. So that has to go through the Drain Commission. So the internal drainage on the site will be better because we will have storm sewers to carry the water to the detention basin. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Can we have them come up after comments? from the
Yes,
public?
I would have the public make their comments. And I just wanted to add, I did bring back the information that was provided at the last meeting, if anybody has desires to read any of that from Ms. Kuzno. And I also have the information, just for the record, I know Mr. Parker stated about his information. Both of the remainder of the information was provided from the applicant last meeting and the public from the last meeting. So if anybody would like to see, it was just a lot of paperwork to make individual copies. And I do also have your comments as well, but we can address those when the commission discusses the
Okay.
item. But I would continue the public hearing.
Anybody else for the applicant?
No, I'll just be brief. I know I'm restricted in minutes, but it's a long process. Okay. I'd like to respond if I can after
Okay.
any other comments. Thank you.
Well, it's still open to hearing. If you want to step up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and you have 5 minutes.
Ron Kuzino,
I'm
8032 Crab Road.
sorry. Can you make sure that we speak clearly into the microphone so we can make sure we get all the name and addresses? You did well, thank you.
Did you hear me or not? Okay. President of Kuzino Family Farms. And I do farm the 5 acres that's farmable. And I don't mow the lawn, I mow the 9 acres that's not farmable 4 or 5 times a year. I keep it looking good. And if it is not looking good, my wife tells me, you need to get out and mow that.
You really should address the chair, sir. Address the chair.
So, anyway, we own the property adjacent to the north of the Lock It Up. And that was prime farm country or farm ground, until they mined it out when the first owner built it. And now that holds, you get a big rain, that holds about 5-6 acres of water, up to 3 feet deep there, the road. And it's a lot of water you're talking about. I hope you got a big holding pond. Because if you figure an inch of water per acre is about 60,000 gallon, and you take that times 36 inches we get per year, it's about 8 billion gallon of water. So it's a lot of water. And you know, I'm 84 years old. I've seen that flood a lot of times. I've seen water running across that road, so it's definitely in a floodplain. So other than that, I oppose rezoning it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
This tall. Everybody hear me now? All right. We're doing good. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Kwiatkowski. I live at 330 West Stearns Road in Temperance. I am also the property manager of the Stabinski Family Farms Limited Liability Company. At the age of 19, my grandfather, Joseph Stabinski, moved to America from Poland to pursue a better life. He and Ron Kuzino's grandfather, Adolf Kuzino, were hardworking farmers, neighbors, and friends. Generations have passed, and the people in this room are proof that farmers are still hardworking neighbors and friends. Thanks to all of you. I did some research through the Bedford Township minutes for the history of this property, and here's a timeline that I came up with. On September 10th, 2003, Erie Storage Facility requested an I-1 planned industrial park zoning for property number 5802-026-07000. The Bedford Township Planning Commission recommended denial of the request for the following reasons. The request was not compatible with future land use map. The request does not meet with the master plan strategy for industrial development. The request goes against the intent of the master plan with respect to the buffer, and the intended use of this potential rezoning of I-1 would go with the land and not the specific use intended by the requesting party. This request was withdrawn and never submitted to the Township Board for decision. Erie Shores Storage Facility then requested a PUD approval and rezoning of the 20-acre parcel, requesting development of 5.64 acres with 14.36 acres as required open space to be a zoned PUD ag. On April 19th, 2005, the Bedford Township Board meeting minutes say Jenkins gave a report from the Planning Commission explaining the buffer needed and the 14 acres to be farmed. Then the minutes go on to say in a motion by Meyer and seconded by Schachman to approve the PUD for Erie Shores mini storage with the following stipulations. The developer shall enter into the PUD agreement with the township. The building's appearance shall be as the design and color scheme for this evening's consideration. The parcel is totally in a floodplain and cannot be used for any other development other than the type being proposed. And last, the developer will continue to use the majority of the property to preserve the farmland characteristics and open space. Article 8 of the PUD agreement is enforcement. Bedford may enforce the terms of this agreement in law and equity and shall have specifically the right to obtain injunctive relief at any time it deems necessary to ensure that the terms of this agreement are being carried out by the owner, developer, or any other interested person or entity or successor thereof associated with the PUD. In October of 2015, Bedford Township's master plan was updated and adopted. On page 39, the plan states, Bedford Township has significant amounts of soil considered prime farmland soils of local importance. Farmland can improve environmental quality with regard to protecting groundwater recharge areas, providing floodwater storage capacity, creating wildlife habitat, which are values often destroyed by development. Goal number 6 of the master plan, to preserve viable farmlands from conversion to and encroachment of non-agricultural uses in designated farmland preservation areas. Goal number 7 is to minimize the impact of development on environmental features such as wetlands, floodplains, woodlands, streams, groundwater recharge areas, and scenic views. This property is a designated agriculture preservation area on Bedford Township future land use map that was by the Manick-Smith Group dated in June of 2015. We now have new owners of this property, and they want to make some changes. Lock It Up Self-Storage is requesting the township revoke the approved PUD plan and the PUD agreement and Bedford Township to rezone the property to I-1, Planned Industrial Park. So they,
I'm sorry, that was 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
So he'll need to wrap it up.
I do have one question for you. 2 meetings ago, you attended and spoke at the microphone, and
Yes, sir.
you said terms of the PUD have not been held up. What did you mean by that?
I don't know that. I don't.
Is that what you mean? The trees were cut from the top down? Oh, yeah. All right. That's what you meant.
I don't remember
Okay.
saying that that the terms were not held up, and I
Okay.
actually have everything that I said in my hand.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I've already seen it. I know, it was brought up at a past meeting. Nobody brought it to my attention, but I took pictures and showed it to them, and they're going to rectify it. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, pull the microphone down.
Is that recording? Got that? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Name and address first.
I'm Diane Cousineau. I also am part of Cousineau Family Farms, which has adjacent property to this. I want to bring it to the attention that the flood map that was submitted categorizes the entire property in the area of special flood hazardous area. It is all blue. And then it is also in across the street from the regulatory floodway, but you can see the water flooding follows the Kelly Doty drain down to which merges with the Bix drain, which merges with the Hooper Run drain, which is open waters within 3/4 of a mile. It is at Kirkwood. It is in open water into Indian Creek and going into the waterway. This area is also in a map on the wetlands map as part of the Lake Erie watershed. Not everything in Bedford is in part of the Lake Erie watershed. That means that these waters go immediately to the watershed and affect wildlife. So to say it has no value, a wet prairie lake plain is what Michigan State categorizes this property as. There's only 8 counties in Michigan that have that. That is a very substantial contributing factor to the wildlife in Lake Erie. I've also submitted a map that is highlighted in brown of the 3 properties that border this property and this property, the farms that do it. To say that there is no value or no substantial wildlife, let me read you what just the highlighted, and you can look at the map that was submitted, and I also have another copy. We have fish, 142.74, waterfowl, 71.37, shorebirds, 71.37, forest birds, 71.37, amphibians, 142.47. This is according to Eagles in the Wetlands. When they bellied out that land to build their hills, they created an emerging wetlands that is more than what was there before. They took the topsoil off. The clay that has existed since 2005 has now turned into a type of soil that is only unique to 2% of this world. And it is what hosts centipedes and all kinds of insects. The insects are fed by the birds. We are in the migratory bird pattern of the entire Ohio Valley that goes to Canada. If anybody's visited the Ohio Wild Bird Preserve, you would know this. There are always birds there. There are woodland birds that live there. There are hawks. There are eagles that nest there and hunt that field. There is a hawk that sits outside that storage unit every year in the winter and sits right on the wire and feeds in that field. To say there is no value is not according to FEMA, and FEMA says that floodplains should be used for, their best use would be open spaces that can be accessed maybe by communities, maybe not, but since this is private land, it is an open space that serves the wildlife of the area. And it is very extreme wildlife, and it is very sensitive because it is in the Lake Erie watershed. We have a watershed project going on now in Michigan trying to restore it. And with that, this property is part of that. It is in the pink and the dark pink and the light pink map shows you that this property sits right there. It's in a hazardous waterplain. Going to the map for future land use in Bedford, if you look at the orange is what is categorized as a high-density residential area. Where is the only orange in all of Bedford? Right there. That is what's in the future plan. You want to put the highest density. What is it? Well, it's not condos. I'm sorry. It's the trailer parks, and it's the low-income housing. It's the retirees. It is people that is going to be a lot of people, but they cannot afford storage. And is there currently storage available? Yes. Did this business go out of business twice before this current owner? Yes. There is a storage unit since this property went in at the end of Telegraph and Crab. There is the Kmart facility at the end of Jackman Road, which is an entire mega storage facility now that is brand new. There is a storage facility on the north side of Temperance on Lewis Avenue. There is storage facility on Summerfield Road, and I think then this company actually has another large storage unit just over the township border into Whiteford. And guess what? Their Whiteford property isn't in a floodplain. If you make a map and a future land use and you have us come with meetings, and this family that I belong to has been here for a very long time, the planning board meetings, you don't make these maps up. This is the stuff I should be in an industrial park or on a mixed use road. Guess what? There's a mixed use road on Lewis Avenue, and there's a mixed use road part on Telegraph, both sides of this property.
Okay,
that doesn't
thank
need
you.
to be eliminating the benefits of a floodplain.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Charles Rowe, 1633 Dean Road, Erie, Michigan, representing Selma Comms, 520 Dean Road, Temperance. I'm a farm manager and farmer of the 61 acres across from where this proposal is being proposed. At the last meeting, I talked about water running downhill. I've talked to David Thompson, friend, foe, whatever. Water runs downhill. That's what I talked about. I don't have it with me because I was married to a combine tonight. There is 14 feet of fall of water running toward Lake Erie. I personally live in Erie, and I farm that 61 acres across from this you store it proposal. Water runs downhill. If they take care of their water, etc., fine. But it can't be done because it flattens out right there. It cannot be done. And with that being said, everybody in this room is downhill from that water. And everybody that's hollering about the water is the people that are getting their water. It's very basic. If you pour water down the drain, it goes down the drain. Well, we're on the end of the drain, and we don't want that. And they're not doing a very good job. Mr. Kuzno has been taking care of them for too many years on his dime. Very much so. And I've helped them. We're good neighbors. We're good friends. That's what we do. And it's not good. And I believe that Mrs. Combs' property, which I representing her, one, it's not for sale. Two, it's not. She's 90 years old. And every time she gets a letter from the township or the drain commission or whatever, she calls me. That's my job. That's what I do. It's okay. I get it. But as farmers and as people in the ag community, there are certain places for houses and certain places for industry, and this is not one. It's not going to work, because if they do this, like my colleague said here, almost made me upset. He said that ground wasn't productive. Well, I grit my teeth. Got the best beans in my life right across from where he said that ground wasn't productive. Believe me, that ground was very productive, and it's very wildlife-ish, and it's very productive. And this year, a dry year, we did good. Last year, we spun in the mud. All of us farmers spun in the mud, and we still got our crop out, and we still fed the world. And we're going to continue to do that. And this is not a good choice. Thank you.
I had a couple questions for you. I think at that meeting I alluded to earlier, you said something about the ditch was cleaned in 2015 and there was a problem caused by that in 2019. Did I get that right?
There was a part of that ditch that was cleaned, which I believe was behind Ronnie. Went through your woods. There was tree roots in there, and they had to come back and redo it. Let me just say this, because I've been on several ditch assessments, and David Thompson and I, the drain commissioner, have been on the same page with a lot of ditch assessments, because I farm a lot of ground in Erie. Everybody's water comes to Erie, which is where I live. And like I said, let's just do an imaginary thing. If you stood next to the old Hackman Farm Supply on the railroad, and you're 5'8", and then you stood at the railroad on Vienna Road where my farm is, there's 14 foot of fall. Water runs down.
Hey, I get that. I'm just curious, how does it relate to the lock it up storage?
Right. Ask me your question again.
The ditch was cleaned in 2015 but caused a problem in 2019. What did that have to do with lock it up?
Too much water coming down too fast.
So capacity wasn't there? Capacity issue?
No. If you do a retention pond, or whatever you want to call it, it's kind of like having an eave trough plugged on your house. It's still going to go out the eave trough, and it's going to go into your whatever. Takes time. But if it affects your neighbor's property, your neighbor's going to be calling you and complaining. And we're the neighbors.
So what did it have to do with lock it up?
Too much water, too fast.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anybody else want to speak?
Lee Lavoie, live on 8722 Crab Road. I'm a licensed Michigan builder, but I also farm 120 acres just to the east, right off of Stearns Road, between Crab and Telegraph. And to answer your question, if there's a retention pond there now, 9 acres? Up to 6 inches, or up to 6 acres is full of water. So all of a sudden you expand the ground, you shrink that retention pond to 1 acre, possibly. I don't know how 1 acre can hold the amount of water that 6 acres can't hold right now. And I think what Charlie Rowe was alluding to was when that floodplain fills up, that water just spills over the road. I submitted some pictures the last meeting, and if you look closely, you can see where the ditch that goes underneath Crab Road and heads south across from Lock It Up Self-Storage. You can see the water lines just spills over the ditch bank and just runs down the field. So I think he was alluding to there's just so much water coming from that area that it can't handle it now. And then you take away 5 acres of retention pond, and there's just no way that all that water that used to sit there, now it's just going to sit in the fields, directly downhill. So that's all I have to say.
Did you also make a comment about the terms of the PUD had not been held up?
Only about the utility lines, which have since been erected back up.
Okay.
The utility lines were laying down, the grass was growing real tall. So that's been taken care of since the last meeting.
Okay, good.
All right.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Carmen Cousineau, part of Cousineau Family Farms. I'd like to go back to when Mr. Garbrick bought that. He didn't plan on that being a storage all years ago, and he wanted to keep it in ag. The ag preservation, I believe, are the words that he used. And we bought the other half of the row farm that came from, and it is prime farm ground that we farm, and that's what that would have been if the land hadn't been taken off of it. So we really oppose this. Our whole life is this farm that's on Crab Road. And we've been there my husband's been there for 84 years. I've been there 68 years. And we feel like this isn't what this was ever meant to be. If Mr. Garbrick had wanted to build, he would have gone over to the industrial park, which is a beautiful industrial park, and that's what that is for all of these buildings. There is no reason why that can't ever be put there. And so I would really like it on record that I oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? Yeah, and I have one question for one of you. What's your name, sir? The golf shirt? The light greenish golf shirt? Yeah, you. Can you come up to the microphone?
Mr. Mahoney, and once the public comment is, make sure the public hearing gets closed.
Should we do that now?
If you have a question for a public,
I
he's
don't.
part of the applicant.
Yeah, I know. All right. Does anybody have any other questions for the public? Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Steiner seconds. Would you mind doing a roll call, please, Mr. Covert?
I'm sorry. So I say yes. Aye. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Swank?
Aye.
Mr. Lamkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Helm?
Aye.
Mr. Fritz?
Aye.
Mr. Mahoney?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. State your name and address for the record.
Kip Van Tassel,
With the microphone. Thank you.
Kip Van Tassel, 7617 Stearns Road, Ottawa Lake, Michigan.
Okay. I just wanted to follow up Ms. Cousineau's concern that I brought up in the meeting, I don't know, 4 meetings ago, about the tree line. Do you have plans to rectify the tree line situation?
That is in the revised site plan that we've submitted.
Mr. Rector?
When the Planning Commission approved the site plan for the office building, it was part of the requirement of the motion for them to reinstall all the buffering around the trees that were cut up from the bottom.
Okay. That's all I had for you. Mr. Parker?
I guess I'm a little confused because everything I heard so far only further, I think, makes the case for having this developed and having the drainage taken care of. With water coming over a road, that's new to me. But the people here are testifying that the water's coming over the road, causing problems for them. This development will have to, as been said by our engineer, this development will have to have the approval of the Monroe County Drain Commission. As many of you probably know, they are going to require that all our water be self-contained. This will eliminate, I think, the most serious problem these people are facing. And as far as the land, I didn't say the land was unproductive. I said, as admitted by one of the people that came up and talked, it's 3/4 underwater. It can't be farmed under most situations. So if nothing gets done today, you'll have a flooded field, I guess, forever. And water will still coming over the road. That's a dangerous situation if, in fact, that's the case. So to me, I understand what everybody's saying. I understand their feelings totally. But here, the main problem seems to be the drainage and the fact that the water is not being contained to everybody's detriment. We're going to cure that. And you've got a very responsible developer. They're spending, even without this approval, they're spending a lot of money to put a brand new, nice-looking office building. And this agreement that I mentioned has many other restrictions on it, such as height, hours of operation. This is going to be a very quiet operation, quiet facility, just like it is now. And it will take care of the drainage problem. And I have no problem having any of the neighbors, one or two of them, who's really got a problem, consult with us. Go with us to the Drain Commission. Hear what he has to say. If you want to make this approval subject, and I think the agreement already calls for, if I can say, it's right here, that all drainage, all surface water accumulating on a site so as to preclude drainage of water on adjacent property, rights of way and everything. Your lawyer took care of it. It's a very well drafted, tight agreement. And so everything I've heard, quite frankly, would warrant, I think, letting this project go forward and eradicate a serious problem. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Parker?
Mr. Mahoney?
Mr. Steiner?
So, Mr. Parker, just real quick on the, because there's so many moving parts and different things we've seen here. So your proposal for the detention basin, I see one drawing that shows it to on the Crab Road side, but then I also see another that also shows with the layout of adding the 12 additional buildings. The detention would be a triangle shape up in the northeast corner of that property. Is that the only detention?
I would just like to say, too, that that is just a very preliminary plot plan that they've submitted to go with the exhibit, which would then come back to the Planning Commission once it's submitted as an engineered site plan with review from the Fire Department, Manning-Smith, Township Planning Department, Monroe County Road Commission, and Monroe County Drain Commission, whether they'll need an Eagle permit or FEMA. Those will all come back once it goes for site plan. That's very preliminary, and you could speak on it, but I'm just going to say that's just where their intention is to put the pond.
Right.
But once they start designing, getting elevations and that nature going through site plan, it will come back. That's why this has to be a recommendation conditioned upon site plan approval and this agreement being signed and recorded before they would be able to get a building permit.
Right, and that's why I asked, because this last rendition does show the 12 buildings, obviously knowing it's a proposed, and that's why I was questioning if that's what the proposal would be. Do you know approximately how many acres that detention basin would represent? Is it 1 acre, 2 acres, 3? It doesn't look like
I really
a lot.
don't. It's a schematic, as has been indicated, that all of this has to have the approval of the Monroe County Drain Commission, and they'll dictate how big that pond has to be, that detention area. This is a schematic, but we're a long way from getting, a satisfaction of all the conditions that are in the agreements we're bound by. But once again, this site has to have all water drained that it generates kept on its site and kept off the road and kept off adjacent property. And we're going to spend a lot of money to build that detention area, wherever it is and how big it is. It's going to be costly.
I mean, because that, of course, we all know up here that is one of the major stipulations. No matter what you do with a piece of property, you're not allowed to drain on someone else's land.
That's correct, but it's right in Section 8 of this contract agreement.
Right. I guess from the residents, their comments, not so much that it comes directly out of your pond, excuse me, onto their property, but it's if it meters out into the drains or the ditches, that's where they seem to be getting the biggest problem, because then it starts overflowing more out of the ditches. And the question was asked by Mr. Mahoney about what happened in 2015 when the ditch got clean, then it caused issues in 2019. I get what happened there, if you had some major rains, you cleaned out the ditches, now the water is going to flow like crazy. And that's, I think, where that water started to overflow when it gets down line. Because before the ditches were cleaned, there were so many obstructions, it laid all along the ditch, all the way along that path, all the way to Lake Erie. Obviously, once it started to flow, at some point, those ditches, they get narrower, they're not all the same width, and that's where it starts to probably bottle up and spill back over into the farmland. So water is I think, in my mind, to probably most of this board is going to say that water seems to be one of the biggest conditions that the adjacent properties would be facing. I mean, people in the public, they could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that even though it's a proposed I-1, they're not in favor of the I-1, but I think even if it was an I-1, they wouldn't be as upset if they, and it's hard to use the word guarantee, but guarantee that there's zero water spilling onto their property, which is going to prohibit them from fully farming their property. I mean, I've seen the farmers out there and seen their tires sometimes spinning. I mean, you get big dualies on these big tractors, and when those things got to spin, it's wet.
That's what we're going to try to correct. And I said, once again, I repeat, any one of these people in attendance here, they want to accompany us to the Monroe County Drain Commission. I assume, I'm not an engineer. That's why I brought this gentleman here, because I figured you'd answer it, because I thought drainage was one of the major issues. I did not know it was going over the road. That's a dangerous condition. I'm sure your legal counsel will tell you that the same thing, but we are concerned about the adjacent farmers, and this is a way to rectify it. Now, I would assume the Monroe County Drain Commission will take in the size of that ditch, what it can accumulate, what can handle, and make us plan accordingly to make sure that the ditch doesn't overflood.
And obviously, they could, if they said you got to have it bigger, they could say, well, you're not going to have any room to do 12 more buildings. You're going to be limited to 5 buildings.
They could. They definitely could.
Just based on that.
They're in control of this situation.
Right.
Not us.
Mr. Jim?
What I'd like to do is piggyback on his question. Maybe you can come up and answer it. It's obvious major concern of the neighbors of the property about the water and how you manage it. And yeah, looking at the preliminary schematic on CO.1, it looks like the existing retention pond is kind of tiny, and then you've got this triangular one that looks about 4 times the size. What was your thought process to, I guess, address this concern that these people have?
Well, first off, there's 2 existing detention basins on that site. In each one of those has a 4-inch outlet. That's all they have. It basically has an overflow structure with a 4-inch outlet, so that's what forces the water to back up into detention basins. In the issue with rain, and I understand what they're saying, you're always going to get a rainstorm that exceeds whatever you design something for. That's impossible not to happen. But what we'll do with the next basin is, I worked with the Drain Commission on multiple projects, and like Mr. Parker said, they are they have a policy, a written policy, and you follow that, and they'll dictate how much water they'll let us run off of that site. And like Mr. Parker said, they may come back and say you can't build 10, 11, 12 buildings. You can only do X number of buildings, because they'll if we go for a building permit for one building, they're going to want to see a master plan of that site, so that they know that the detention facility we build will be big enough to do the whole site. Even if we have to do the detention facility in phases, they are very thorough at what they do regarding drainage review.
But I got to believe you're going to put the asphalt in all at once, as opposed to putting buildings on top of the asphalt, correct? Or will they pour asphalt in sections, as you're talking about?
Yeah, typically, I've worked for Lock It Up for quite a few years, and if they build one building, they do an asphalt for that building. If they build 2 buildings, they do asphalt for those buildings. But I worked on sites that are, 15 buildings, and I've never seen one where they went in and developed the whole site at one time.
Mr. Corvette, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just to again piggyback on that discussion with the water, obviously is a concern. It's the concern, right? I think for all of us up here, the major concern. definitely what's been said. My previous experience understanding is that water has to be handled on site. Everything that we're talking about, you can't be impacting your neighbors, etc. The concern over the receiving ditch, and again, I know the Drain Commission, they need to look at that, they need to approve it, etc. And they'll get our minutes, they'll get the board minutes and see the comments about the concerns we have. I guess the question I have, and maybe it's for Jody or Marty, is can we through a meeting or some other mechanism of communication to them that this is going to generate a lot more water and it's got to go somewhere, and we really need to make sure the receiving stream, if this moves forward, can handle it. So is there a way that we can over-communicate the importance of this?
Well, I think the first intention is going to be how many structures they're going to install. The Drain Commission may want the detention pond size for the entire site, regardless of how many they're planning to put in. If they may be planning to put in 3 or 4, the Drain Commission may require the detention pond to already be sized to maintain 12 additional structures. It's going to depend on, of course, hard surface. Once they start moving forward through site plan, as Mr. Steiner said, they may not even get additional 12 structures on the site, depending once the wetland delineation is done or what soils they have to move for the flood zone area. Those types of things coming into play with the site plan, they may not be able to even construct a total of 12. The Drain Commission normally looks at it as an overall site, and the developer may want to look at it that way instead of redesigning a detention pond as they move forward. But by all means, we could set up a meeting with the Drain Commission, and if any of the Planning Commission members and the applicant
and the public,
and
we could invite.
public
Yep.
would be, I can, if that's a desire of the commission, absolutely. But they do oversee the drainage aspect. Township does not.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow
Final.
up question. Yeah, the interesting point about the retention and having it designed, constructed up front for the potential of 12 buildings, or however many it ends up being designed for. Is that something we can include in a recommendation at this point, if we wanted to do that? Or is it too early for that? That would be something that if it moves forward at a site plan approval process.
I'm not certain I have the answer to that, but I believe the Drain Commissioner would determine to what extent the site needs to be developed as far as detention areas. And I don't think that we should endeavor telling the Drain Commissioner how to design or what latitude to require for that design.
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm sorry. No.
Public meeting. Public.
I have a question. Can the detention pond be expanded if necessary? If you're in the third phase or fourth, whatever phase you're going to do, if we find that the one that you design and build isn't big enough?
That we have to follow the standards that the Drain Commission sets, and once we do that, if there's some issue that comes up, like I said earlier, you're going to get a rain event that's going to exceed the design capacity of anything you do, but that's why you try to do factors of safety. They make us do freeboard above the outlet. They've got a lot of safety built into their regulations, but like Jody is saying, once we go to them, even if we say we're only going to do 1 or 2 buildings, they have the ability to say, we want you to do the whole thing and we want you to do this with it. So, yeah, I don't know. I can't speak on behalf of the developer if they're willing to rectify something if somebody perceives a problem.
Ms. Rector.
And keep in mind that if they only propose 2 structures, they're going to come for site plan for 2 structures, size the detention pond for 2 structures, and have to have review and approval. Once they move forward with an additional structures, those site plan review process will have to take place for each section of the project they are desiring to move forward. So if they do not submit for the entire 12 structures on site to get the pond sized in the beginning, they're going to have to come back for site plan approval for each additional structure that they propose. Right now, they've been able to go back because the PUD was approved, but this is going to be an individual site plan for each proposed structure. So if they come with 4 buildings, the pond will have to be sized to the Drain Commission for the proposed 4 structures. If they show 12, the pond will be designed for the 12 structures, or each time they will have to come back for site plan and review and approval process.
I know nothing about development, but I'd presume that you would build the pond once and not keep making it bigger as you...
I've seen it done both ways. Some developers want to do it all at one time, and some just say, I don't want to spend the money now. Yeah. But the redeeming thing about doing it in phases for the town on the township's behalf is you have a shot every time they come back. You have a shot, and if some problem does develop, then the township reviewing authorities can say, now we're having this issue, we need to talk through that. So you get, if they come back with 6 different projects, you're going to get 6 different shots at talking to them about problems that you're seeing.
Question for Mr. Camprith. What recourse is there for neighboring properties if Lock It Up complies with the Drain Commission requirements and there becomes a drainage issue or flooding?
Well, certainly they could complain to the Drain Commissioner, which has jurisdiction over this. I suppose they could file a lawsuit against the developer for a nuisance action. That would be difficult and expensive. So the remedies are limited once it's built according to the Drain Commission criteria. But there are remedies, but they're not very well.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Schenk?
If I may, a couple questions. I was not on the commission back in last December when this was brought up before. Manick Smith suggested that this be turned down. What was the reason for that?
When they came in December, they were requesting the entire parcel to be revoked from the PUD and the PUD agreement and just rezoned to industrial, straight industrial. There was comments of it being inconsistent with the master plan, and the intent of the property would open for all industrial uses, not just specifically mini warehouse.
And the master plan still has not changed, so it's still against the master plan.
The master plan has not been changed.
Well, regarding the master plan, there are goals that promote farmland, but there's also goals that promote business vitality, maintaining high-quality community facilities and services, and with the tax base that goes toward paying for schools, for fire, et cetera. So it's kind of a balancing act, I think. Mr. Steiner.
I think some of the questions were probably answered by different folks here. Number one, the master plan document, it's a living document. It's never set in stone for life. So that obviously, you can't say, well, the master plan said this 10 years ago, that's what it has to be today. Now, if it says it today, when it comes up for the next review might say, well, we're going to change that area to something other than what it's currently zoned today. It's not saying you're going to rezone it, but it's saying that's future plan use. And then going back to the question of number of units and everything, I think when the gentleman was just back up at the podium, he said, obviously, what the Drain Commission says, they're going to build it. And then Ms. Rector stated, if they come in and ask for 4 buildings tomorrow, that's what they're going to get a site plan approval for. They're limited to 4 buildings, period. And hopefully that the Drain Commission, whatever they would submit, they are accurate, very correct. But again, if you don't get a catastrophic rain until they come in for their next approval, then you're going to say that everything's working fine. But they come in for that next one and they could say, okay, we're going to build 4 more buildings. Drain Commission says, yes, your pond's fine, it's good to go. But now we get this catastrophic rain, now we've got that issue that we've possibly overflowed it. But then, again, the protection that Ms. Rector stated, now if they come in to go into more buildings, whether it's another 2 at a time or whatever, that is when the Drain Commission could say, we're going to force you to build another pond if you want to expand. mean, obviously, making multiple ponds at different times, it's more costly, not as effective as building one pond one time, get it done, and get it done right. But that's the Drain Commission's jurisdiction. So I don't know what the developer, their plan is. I mean, they already stated they're not going to come in and go 12 right away. I don't know. You know, they could state here today that their goal is to put in 4 right now and subsequent afterwards. But that's not something that's in stone. They could come in and say, you know what, we found out there's going to be a book of business and we got our approval. We're going to go ahead and get our site plan now for 8. And they can do that. But again, it's going to be all tied to that Drain Commission. So much revolves around the Drain Commission. And like I said, it's hard to use the word guarantee than when the Drain Commission, if they were to say, build this retention pond, is it fully ready for that 100-year flood? We don't know that till the 100-year flood comes, unfortunately.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Covert.
Yeah, a thought on your question as far as what happens if, you know, the retention pond is built and it's not sufficient and there is flooding, unfortunately, on neighboring properties. Jody, you had mentioned, and we haven't gotten there yet, but there's some provisions in the draft agreement that may give us some teeth, so to speak. Right now, item number 8, as was mentioned before, in the draft agreement says the site shall be graded and drained so as to dispose of all surface water accumulated on the site in such a way as to preclude drainage of water onto adjacent property, road, rights of way, or toward the buildings on site. And then there's a later clause under 13 that's remedies. And then there's another clause that's 18 that's termination. So the way, again, I'm not an attorney, but the way I read that is if we word this in such a way that, hey, it says in 8, they're going to handle all the water, it's not going to impact anyone. If that doesn't happen, I think we can address that under a remedies section. We can add some language in there that forces something.
And that was my comment where it states of being set by a date of the Monroe County Circuit Court. I believe that should be back with the restrictions of the township because the agreement is with the township. And I did express to Mr. Camprath my concerns on 13 and 18 for remedies and termination because this is an agreement that the landowner is presenting to move forward with further development. And I think it should be something within the township. Nothing against the county.
So to that end, I just was, again, writing some thoughts down as I was reviewing everything. And under remedies, to that point that Jody just brought up of adding some sort of language that the owner developer has 30 days to remedy any violation of this agreement or the township ordinance. And again, that's just my thought as I was reading this. And then what I don't know is then what? After 30 days or whatever we decide, if we want to add some time frame in there, what happens then?
And I think if you look down in termination,
Yep.
a portion of that actually only gives them 3 years of the date of the agreement for final site plan for the structures. So I think if 30 days, we could add something of the termination. If it's not remedied in 30 days, it can be revoked by the township.
Okay.
If I'm wrong, Mr. Camprath?
Well, I'm doing a little thinking out loud here in response to what you stated and your premise. Keep in mind the drainage plan and the detention pond will all be designed according to and built according to the Drain Commission criteria. That is not a township criteria, and the proposed agreement presented by the developer states that they'll comply with all of those county agency requirements. Well, if they comply with those requirements by the Drain Commission and it still floods, I don't believe that's a breach of our agreement.
So not to argue, right, because I'll lose.
Yes.
But right now, the way this reads is all surface water will be controlled on site with no impact to surrounding properties. So even if they follow that, right, I'd
That's
say
a pretty broad statement, all surface water. I wouldn't want to get an adversarial case on what that means. But again, I can see the opponent saying, well, we complied with the county drain agency and the criteria, and there could be a 200-year storm that is not designed for, and it's going to flood, and it's going to overwhelm the detention system and the ditches and the fields, and I can't imagine that a trier of fact, a court would indicate that, well, you breached the agreement because you didn't control all the water.
But there'd be an opportunity for the owner or developer in that 30-day period to demonstrate that. Like, hey, this was a act of God, 200-year, 500-year flood. It wasn't designed for that. It's very unfortunate that it happened.
Sure, all of those things. It just doesn't make me feel comfortable that we could terminate the agreement based upon an act of God.
What would termination look like?
Well, there would be other provisions. There could be other provisions if they breach the agreement. Say, any of these other requirements, terms, operations, hours of operations, hazardous materials, screenings, on and on in here. It seems to me that they ought to get notice of what the township believes is a breach of the agreement and have an opportunity to cure. And if they fail to cure within a reasonable amount of time, then knowingly that they might expect the township to move towards terminating the agreement. We've seen that with some other developments in the township. We didn't really have that ability to terminate an agreement because there was no agreement. So I would struggle with the drainage, the excessive water because of a 200-year storm or because of a storm beyond the design criteria of the Drain Commission, but other issues with the developer and their operations that might be contrary to what they're supposed to do in the agreement, I think that those items would be more controllable as far as a remedy, giving them adequate notice to cure, and if they decide not to, then maybe they don't want to be in business there under this contract.
So if the commission wants to add a time frame to item 13, that would help, Jody, to your point of some township control, so to speak, and not leaving it all up to the county.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. That would be a good thing, and of course, any party could, they feel aggrieved, they could end up asking a court for an injunction from enforcement of that provision, and we'll see what happens. You can't stop somebody from suing.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Director.
Would you like me to address the comments that were sent to me?
In a moment, I have a question
Okay,
first. Sure. The proposed agreement, that isn't being agreed upon tonight or voted on, right? That'll be hammered out later?
When you make a motion to either recommend to approve or deny, that is included in the agreement, or any, I think I notated, any conditions or comments the Planning Commission wants to add or changes to the agreement should be included, because this will then move to the Township Board for a decision with those comments, whether it is to approve or deny.
Okay, so it's a speak now or forever hold your peace. Did anybody have any thoughts on the proposed agreement? I had one question while you guys think about it. One of the items, was it item 10, where it specified maximum 35-foot high building? Yeah, go ahead.
I did look that up because that was one of the comments that was sent. And 35 foot was what was permitted with the PUD agreement. However, by ordinance, they would actually be permitted without the agreement 40 feet in height in industrial.
Are you going to have a problem with, say, 25 foot? You'll have time at the end to make a public comment. All right, so 25 feet, that's agreeable?
Make
Ms.
sure that
Director?
gets noted in any motion of any changes, and please refer to the numbers so we can work with the applicant's legal and our legal counsel on getting it amended, because I would like to have any amendments regardless of the recommendation, amended and back to the applicant before it goes to the township board.
Okay. Do you want to go through that list of comments?
Pardon me?
The comments
Oh,
before I interrupted you.
I did correct the misspelling in items 5 that were accept and should be accept, and added, if the commission can look at item 7, no other use than the principal use of indoor self-storage or those uses permitted in subparagraph 6 immediately above shall be permitted on the property, and there shall be no repairing or maintaining of any stored items, and there should be another activity, and the request was to put residing, hobby, or purpose allowed on the property.
So adding residing, just to be clear, nobody's going to live there.
And then, and my comments of number 1 needs to be amended with the fencing, as due to the office building being approved, the requirement of the parking was permitted to be outside the fenced area. So that language will need to be included in a motion to change number 1. And also in number 3, to remove that language as a resident manager may be allowed on site. Then number 10, the 25 feet. Refer to number 5 for clarification that the office hours, that was just a comment that was requested, if that is going to be office hours from 8 to 10, because it does state that tenants can have access to the structures for 24 hours, 7 days a week. And then number 13 and number 18 regarding the time frame of remedies and termination. And if the commission so desired to have legal representation and staff to work on those amendments in those 2 sections, determining on the specific time frame that you want to give the applicant to correct the remedies should there be any violations of the agreement. And then, of course, anything else that Mr. Camprath would like to add, or the applicant.
Mr. Camprath?
If I could say, this agreement was presented by the applicant as their proposed agreement. We, only with their consent, can really negotiate any changes in this, and I don't know if that's what we're supposed to be doing here tonight, but they have presented this agreement for your consideration and recommendation to the Township Board. So I think you should give your recommendation, but it would be advisable that you also make comments and recommendations to the Township Board as to the suggestions that Jody is making.
Should Mr. Parker stand up at the microphone and agree to the changes we've put in for the record?
I just wanted to
Does
give
that
one
help?
more clarification. I had a question regarding the tax bills and the tax benefit to the township. And actually, in the summer taxes, the full amount goes to the county and state education, so there is an administration fee. So in the summer taxes, it was $48.41 to the township. And then the winter taxes, they do pay a large winter taxes. However, I did not calculate it because it goes by this form of it, and 2% of the total tax in the winter stays in the township. Everything else is dispersed out to county library, fire protection, Lake Erie Transit, fire department, school debt, school education tax, school operating, Monroe County ISD, county senior citizens, county operating, county fairfare less than 1%, county museum, Monroe County Community College, police, and county veterans. So it's then dispersed by percentages, and if anybody would like a copy of this, I will have it available, or it will be, I believe, in the fall program that gets sent out with the township update. But if you would like a copy of this, I'd be more than happy. And this is where it breaks down winter. In the summer, the township keeps an administration fee.
And with every building they build that adds value to
It
the
would be-
property, the
yes.
taxes go up commensurate with their growth.
And I'll say that's all I have.
That's all? Okay. So the changes, do you want to summarize them? Can you, and Mr. Parker can for the record?
I think I heard all of them, yeah. We proposed this agreement a few months ago, and Paul, your legal counsel, was very cooperative. He made a number of changes for the protection of the township and the residents. They weren't my ideas, but they were their ideas. I did not object to one of them. For example, no outside storage. That's a big thing, typically, to storage. We didn't argue with it. A number of other changes I thought were very productive in terms of protecting the township's interests. So I had no objection to those, and I have no objection to these that have been talked about this evening on behalf of Lock It Up.
Any other comments? Mr. Covrat?
Just to get some clarification or on a couple of those items, the hours of operation right now says 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week. Is that for office?
No, that's for the tenants. You know, they come on Sunday sometimes. It's not for the office.
Okay. And then I throw out for the commission to consider adding 30 days for a remedy under item number 13 for the owner to address any issues.
Is 30 days agreeable, Mr. Parker?
Yes, 30 days is agreeable. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Parker?
Mr. Mahoney, I know, Mr. Corvette, you've got a lot of stuff written down. I know that one of the things we talked about again was about the, find the right point here, of taking it directly to circuit court. Did you spell that one out as to what we would recommend? I know we talked about a 30-day remedy, but
yeah, that's a good question. And I'll look to my right here. Adding the 30 days in gives the township the ability to have some local control. If that goes past, then what do we do with Monroe County Circuit Court the way it reads right now, Marty?
That would be deleted. The remedy would be, well, then the township would have the authority to terminate the agreement if the breach or the problems weren't corrected after giving them written notice of the problems.
Would there be an issue that we have no jurisdiction over the Monroe County Drain Commission, but the Monroe courts would, if there should be a drain issue?
Well, that would be in that realm and not involve us. I mean, we may be involved in the periphery, but we wouldn't be a party to that.
so our part is basically the 30 days violation of the site plan, the approved site plan,
and
the buildings,
agreement.
ordinances, agreements, all based on township regulations. The exception, drainage, everything outside of that is 100% Drain Commission.
And that can be spelled out?
Well,
should it be?
To some degree, it is spelled out, as Mr. Covrat was mentioning. I don't know if that was paragraph 8 or 10.
8, yeah. Yeah.
So if it comes to the point of them violating a Drain Commission requirement, then I'd say that's a breach of the agreement.
Right. I mean, that in that point, if they violated, even though it was a Drain Commission item, it's still part of the overall agreement based on the site plan approval process.
Yes.
Again, if it's something outside of that, the water overflows because the Drain Commission told them they could put in this size pond and it overflowed because it maybe should have been a bigger pond, then that's 100% Drain Commission. That's not a terminable offense.
Right.
Any other concerns, comments, questions from anybody on the commission? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Director?
just a friendly reminder, 2 motions. And
Two motions.
Yes.
The first would be to conditionally rezone this property. Does anybody care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Helm?
I'm going to need help, but I'll do the first one to rezone the property to I-1 industrial use. At parcel number, sorry. Parcel number 5802-026-070-00, subject site at 100 West Stearns Road, Temperance, Michigan.
With conditions?
With conditions that will be approved on the second motion? Is that, because we have to do the rezoning first and then go to the removal of the PUD?
If you're recommending to approve the conditional rezoning, you'll need to add the conditions of the rezoning and any recommended changes in this portion of the motion, of the agreement that were discussed. And I would like, if so desired, to include that the applicant agreed to the changes in the agreement.
So we'll just have to go through all those we talked about?
Yes.
Or is that already?
And supporting reasons for the rezoning request.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we move to revoke the PUD agreement granted.
We're still on the I-1.
Okay, so move to conditionally rezone Ag 1 to L1 industrial to allow future development of 12 additional mini warehouse units, all subject to review and approve the submitted conditional rezoning agreement and condition upon site approval process.
So Jody, to add the other conditions, can we second it and then have a friendly amendment? I'll second that.
Okay, second by Mr. Coverett. Any friendly amendments?
Jody, jump in if I miss any of these, right? So this is where we need to go through the agreement and capture everyone? Okay, so item 3D1, to revise it to exclude the parking area from the area required to be enclosed within the fence. Item 3D3, to remove the statement allowing a resident manager to reside on the site. Item 3E5, that's actually okay, so nothing there. Item 3E7, I believe we're adding the word residing before hobby. Correct. Item 3E10, we're going to limit the building to a height of 25 feet. Item 3E13, we're going to add that the owner developer has 30 days to remedy any infraction of the agreement or township ordinance.
I accept the friendly amendments.
Okay. Mr. Coverett, did you catch the agreed 25-foot
Yes.
height? Did you catch that?
Yes.
Okay, I missed that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I also had a note, should we add that the request limits the property to the current use and does not allow for other I-1 district uses?
It's item 3A, permitted use.
Yeah.
It's already in there, okay. All right.
Yeah, and I think it's actually in portion, the second page, the third paragraph, according to the conditions voluntarily provided by the owner development developer for development of the property solely for the use of indoor self-storage. I did have another friendly amendment to amend Section 18 to coincide with Section 13, and that conditioned upon site plan approval and the recorded agreement once site plan is approved with the Monroe County Register of Deeds. So it's a recorded document that would run with the land, no matter who the owner is.
You accept that?
I accept all friendly amendments.
Anything else? Okay, so the motion's on the floor and it's been seconded. Mr. Coverett, do you want to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Helm?
Aye.
Mr. Coverett votes aye. Mr. Swank?
No.
Mr. Lamkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
I struggled with this the last time around. I'm not 100%, so respectfully, no.
Is that a no?
Nay.
Okay.
Mr. Fritz?
Aye.
Mr. Mahoney?
Aye. Motion passes 5 to 2.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And again, if you want to make a comment at the end, you're welcome to. No, at the end of the meeting. Okay, moving on.
To the second motion?
Oh, there's a second motion. Someone care to make a second motion?
I'll make a second motion to move to revoke the PUD agreement granted to Erie Shores Storage Facility and agreement assumed by Lock It Up LLC in the Bedford Township.
Any support?
Second.
Question, shouldn't it say subject to approval of the I-1?
No, because the I-1 was approved.
I mean approved by.
Yes, because they're both recommendations to the Township Board, so it has to be conditioned upon review and approval and the process of the site plan to be reviewed and approved once the Township Board makes a decision. Because the Township Board's decision will be conditioned upon the site plan as well.
Okay. You want to restate it with condition of passing?
I move to revoke the PUD agreement granted by Erie Shores and the agreement assumed by Lock It Up Storage of Bedford Township if the Bedford Township Board approves it.
Approves I-1.
I-1 rezoning.
Mr. Lamkowski had seconded the first motion. Is that?
Do you want a second?
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Lemkowski seconds. Mr. Coverett, do you want to call the roll?
Mr. Helm?
Aye.
Mr. Lamkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Swank?
Aye, I guess.
Mr. Coverett votes aye. Mr. Steiner?
I'll stick with the original no.
Mr. Fritz?
Aye.
Mr. Mahoney?
Aye. Motion passes 6 to 1. Okay, on to item 8, new business.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Mahoney.
did I forget something
just
else?
wanted, in case any of the public leaves, this item is scheduled to go to the Township Board on November 15th, Tuesday, November 15th at 7 p.m. at the Township. It will be on the agenda. It is not a public hearing at that meeting. However, in the beginning of the meeting, they do have public comment, and that's when the decision will be presented to them for a decision. Sorry, just in case anybody left.
Thank you. Okay, item 8, new business. Item A, request a sign waiver for RG Enterprise or Properties LLC, Henry Hinosa, AM Skin Health and Aesthetic Medicine, Holly Milliken, in a PBO, Professional Business Office Zoning District on parcel number 2024-106-014-00, otherwise known as 6525 Secor Road, Lambertville, Michigan 48144. Ms. Rector?
Yes, again, the applicant is Holly McKillen, 6008 Wells Road. Sign company is Graphic Signs. Address is 6525 Secor Road, 5802-106-01400, PBO Professional Business Office. The applicant is seeking to replace the existing sign insert to install an LED message board and an additional insert to include the name of the business. Per section 41922 states one monument sign in a PBO Professional Business Office is permitted up to 40 square feet in area, plus 40 square feet of the additional structure for a monument sign, and 7 feet in height. While the existing sign meets the design requirements per section 41922(1) states no flashing, moving, osculating, or intermittent type of illuminated sign or display shall be permitted in any zoning district. Therefore, the Planning Commission shall determine how often the message can change so not to create a safety issue by distracting traffic. Therefore, a waiver to allow an LED message board to be installed is required. Should the request to be considered, the following waivers are required. Approval to allow an LED message board, and the following shall be considered for inclusion in any motion to approve. All required permits shall be obtained from Bedford Township, and the applicant shall continue to maintain the entire perimeter landscaped area of the base no less than 2 feet wide, growing in a healthy condition. There was an inquiry on the square footage of the sign, and I just wanted to touch base with the commission. And in the general provisions of the sign ordinance, it does state that all freestanding, I don't remember what letter it was, all freestanding signs shall not exceed the maximum height and surface area specified in the section of 1922 for the use, zoning district, and/or sign specific. When it gets down to advertising, there shall be allowed an additional square footage of decorative structure not to exceed the maximum square footage allowed for the sign, or 50 square feet, whichever is less. So that determines that they can have 50 square feet of signage and 50 square feet of base. However, they cannot exceed the overall height of 7 feet. So each portion is calculated separately for base, monuments, the pillars, any decorative structure is allowed up to 50 square feet or whichever is less.
Which were less, correct?
Pardon me?
39.84 square
Yeah,
feet.
so the sign is actually existing. They're just actually looking to add the name of the structure on the top of the sign. And I believe Mr. Harrell can speak on that.
Okay, Mr. Harrell?
Yes, Gary Harrell, 3443 Quail Hollow Drive.
Anything to add?
No, I think it's pretty much covered. The sign is existing. It's going to be exactly in the same location. We're simply taking out the center section of the sign and putting the digital sign with the name of the business above it.
And like most other, if somebody is going to make a motion, it should include about the message not changing less than 5 seconds, dimmed at dusk. Is there anything else that we normally put on these LED?
Dim down at night.
Yeah, at dusk.
Yeah, and it'll do the same as we did in the past. It'll dim. It'll have the capabilities of dimming at night versus daytime to control the brightness of it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the same restrictions as far as the movement from. I believe is it 5 seconds? Can't remember. But
it was 5 seconds. And is it already in the ordinance that it can't advertise another business or event? Is that right, or do we have to?
Advertises for the business, because we allow them in multi-units, so it has to advertise for what's in the structure.
Okay, do we need to specify that in a motion? Or is it already in the
The
ordinance?
desire of the board?
I'd put it into,
Okay.
just for clarification.
Okay, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion to approve the proposed digital LED sign on 6525 Secor Road, Lambertville, Michigan 48144, parcel number 5802-106, 2024-014-00 in a PBO Professional Business Office District. The sign itself, the structure meets the current ordinance, and what we need to approve at this point is to allow the LED message board. The sign shall not change any more than 5-second intervals. The sign must be dimmed at night. All required permits shall be obtained from Bedford Township, and the applicant shall continue to maintain the entire perimeter landscaped area of the base no less than 2 feet wide, growing and kept in healthy condition as presented.
Support. Okay, seconded by Mr. Fritz. Mr. Kovrat, do you want to call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Fritz?
Aye.
Mr. Swank?
Aye.
Mr. Lamkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Helm?
Aye.
Mr. Kovrat votes aye. Mr. Mahoney?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 8B, request for final site plan approval for Ort Tool and Die Milano Associates LLC for a building addition located on parcel number 5802-101-010-00, otherwise known as 6555 Dixie Highway, Erie, Michigan 48133. Ms. Rector.
The applicant is Romanco Building Company, Mr. Kevin Romanco, representing the owner, Milano Associates. I-3 General Industrial District, 6555 Dixie Highway. The owner is proposing a 17,767 square foot warehouse building addition and associated 20-foot stone fire lane to be attached on the west side of the 95,202 square foot factory for a total of 112,969 square foot structure on a 23.5 acre parcel. The applicant has indicated the addition will be utilized for additional assembly space. The provided parking of 114 spaces and 5 barrier-free spaces for a total of 119 parking spaces meets the requirements of the ordinance, as the proposed addition is for an assembly area and no additional employees. Should there be any change in the use of the addition, parking shall be recalculated by ordinance. As noted on the site plan, there are 3 existing 10 by 70 loading and unloading areas which meet the intent of the ordinance. Per ordinance, no parking landscaping is required and no additional lighting is being proposed. However, any additional lighting to be installed shall be reviewed and approved. Today, the applicant did submit an illumination plan. We have reviewed it. Should be determined that those wall packs will be directed downward. It does show the illumination plan, and the illumination does meet the intent of the ordinance. As noted on the site plan, as directed by the Monroe County Drain Commission, the existing detention pond will be dredged and restored to the previously approved 2015 elevations, and the existing 8-inch meter pipe which runs from the detention pond to the redrain shall be inspected and then cleaned as directed by the Drain Commission. The Fire Department reviewed and approved the site plan on 9/8/2022. The Monroe County Drain Commission reviewed and approved the site plan with comments on 9/2/2022. The Monroe County Drain Commission, in regards to soil erosion and sedimentation control, reviewed and approved the site plan with comments on 9/7/2022. The Monroe County Road Commission, via email dated 9/7/2022, has no comments as there's no work being done within the road right-of-way. And the Manikin Smith reviewed and approved the site plan with comments on 10/4/2022. Should site plan approval be granted, a motion should include that the approval shall be contingent upon addressing all comments and conditions of the Bedford Township Fire Department, Manikin Smith, Monroe County Drain, and Monroe County Drain in regards to soil and sedimentation control approval letters.
Mr. Romanco, do you want to state your name and address into the microphone?
I'm Kevin Romanco.
Kevin Romanco. Address? Your business address?
Pemberville, Ohio. 5543 Swan Road, Pemberville, Ohio.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Romanco? Is there anything you wanted to add?
Jody does such a good job. But,
She does.
I don't want to try to stand her up.
I have to say, Katrina did that one, so.
Oh, good job, Katrina.
That's why she's squirming over here. She's like, oh.
I just read it this time.
Does anybody care to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Govret.
I'll give it a shot. I'll make a motion to recommend final site plan approval for Ort Tool and Die
Milano Associates LLC for a building addition located on parcel number 5802-101-010-00, otherwise known as 6555 Dixie Highway, Erie, Michigan. Contingent upon addressing all comments and conditions of the Bedford Township Fire Department, Manikin Smith Group, Monroe County Drain Commission, and the Monroe County Drain Commission in regards to soil erosion sedimentation control letters of approval.
Is there support for the motion?
Second.
Mr. Steiner seconds. Mr. Coverett, you want to call the roll?
Mr. Coverett votes aye. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Swank?
Aye.
Mr. Lamkowski?
Aye.
Mr. Helm?
Aye.
Mr. Fritz?
Aye.
Mr. Mahoney?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Manco.
Thank you
Thank
for,
you. Have a good evening.
tell your applicant, thanks for continuing to expand in Bedford.
Okay, moving on to item 8C, discussion regarding text amendment to the sign ordinance. Does anybody have any comments regarding sign ordinance? What should be changed? Any additions? Any comments in general? Ms. Rector, do you have anything to start us out?
I did supply some of the comments that we had, and we have them highlighted in letter O is where the LED message board is having some difficulty. I think it might want to be discussed on where the commission would like to see them continue to be installed without a sign waiver. Because the notice, the zoning says that a zoning district other than residential districts, unless otherwise developed as a non-residential use permitted within a residential zoning district. We normally don't have signs in residential zoning districts. However, there are some uses such as schools, churches, places of worship. Those types of places are permitted in residential that may want an LED message board. So it's going to be the decision of the commission. That's the language that the planning department could come up with to allow it in residential if it was a non-residential use permitted by ordinance. I know the discussion was the setting chip message change no more than 5-second intervals. We did have some input at one of the meetings from the sign company that said maybe the sign to dim at dusk or be turned off and be a solid sign that didn't scroll any longer once it was dusk. That was the option. Instead of having it continue to scroll after dusk and dimming it, just make it a solid sign, especially if it abutted a residential district. And that the sign should only advertise for the use or uses of that specific parcel. I think that was expressed in one of the emails I got received. And then to be removed is the portion of no flashing, moving, osculating, or intermittent sign of illumination shall be displayed in any zoning district.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Coverett.
So just real quick, is this, so we're discussing throwing ideas out and then this will come back with proposed, like red line strikeout revisions, or is that what we're looking at now?
I will take any input from any of the commission of how your desire is to move forward. Sign ordinance has been needing amendments for a long time. I have touched base on some of the signs that I have requested. And then I will take any consideration. If the desire is to continue to amend some languages, I would be happy to sit down with anybody. I did speak in great lengths on phone conversation with Mr. Harrell regarding some language. If you'd like, I go over the sections that I have notated, and then I can take comments from anybody that they may have, and then we can go from moving forward, or we can talk about, I mean, I don't know what the desire is of how in depth, but we definitely need to take into consideration the changes in the community moving forward.
Well, it might be easy for us to discuss, if you can bullet point the LED requirements, just as just the first thing we'll talk about. And then everybody can make a comment about, hey, it should be that or this. You know, it's like we have to add at least 3 things to every motion now, like the 5-second minimum requirement, the dusk dim down.
And and if as we move forward through it, if someone has a comment in a different section that we haven't addressed, please let me know so we can look. This is just information that we've had on previous sign waivers and some of the comments and concerns we've had that have been addressed in the planning department, such as you'll see when we get to temporary signs and grand opening signs. I need input from, I know what my opinion is as a planning department, but I do need input from the commission because you are the deciding board.
Mr. Chairman, that's where I was heading because I didn't know what we were exactly doing tonight. I think you, Jody, going through and explaining each of these, because some of them are just shaded, and you can explain why you shaded it, type of thing.
Yes.
And then maybe there's some sort of a feedback from us back to you after you, like at a later date or before the next meeting or whatever it is. Specific to those, just thoughts I had was to the lighting. We talked at length recently about measuring brightness. What is bright? And measuring lumens and putting some quantitative value to that. I would be in favor of that for whatever that's worth, is adding something. I don't know what that is, but if it's above X amount brightness, then you got to turn it down.
And I will just say the difficult part on that is probably the same thing we're going to fall into ordinance with is with sound. How do we measure sound? Decibels, we don't have anything to measure sound. I don't know if I can get with Mr. Harrell. I know he's willing to work with us on some direction on those, but I think that that's going to be a determination because if the sign is a nuisance to a neighbor, our ordinance does not allow nuisance to neighboring properties. So if I drive by, I might not think the sign is very bright, but someone that lives next door to it might say it's bright. So that's why the suggestion was maybe to just have it be dimmed at dusk and a standalone sign at dusk instead of just dimming at dusk instead of letting it continue to scroll.
So I like that.
I'm sure everyone has been around the community. Some signs are brighter than others. Some dim directly at dusk and some do not. But I will say,
and some neighbor may not like who's got the sign, and I think it's too bright, and you're a nuisance, and
Absolutely.
it's like, what the heck? So, yeah.
Mr.
But we can definitely look into lumens and that, and get some
maybe
input to come back with.
Yes, exactly. And then one other thing there, we say we're going to dim it, but we don't say, or turn it off, but we don't say when we could turn it back on. So I would think, if you're going to turn it off, when can you turn it back on? Seems like a logical question.
Pretty much
Probably
dusk to
photo
dawn, though.
wire.
I mean,
To turn it back on during the daylight.
Yeah, but it doesn't say that now. So
yeah, that probably should say dusk to dawn because you can't put a time on it because of different times of the year and things like that.
You can put a timer on it.
Well, no, what I'm
can't
saying,
specify a
the
time
ordinance
in the
can't
ordinance,
say
yeah.
it's got to be 8 o'clock because it might be 9:30 before it gets dark out.
But if you put there's timers that would dim it and that run by the latitude.
Yeah,
I think
light,
you're going to have to probably do that. That's more of a light sensor, not so much of a timer.
Yeah.
Can you come to the microphone?
On a typical digital sign, it has a sensor in it that reads daylight, so it adjusts automatically.
Photo eye.
In essence, yes, it's very similar to a photo eye. So in essence, the sign moving forward, if someone comes in for a digital sign, that would be something that I would require if it were me standing there, would have the does this sign have the technology of automatically adjusting from dusk to dawn?
Mm-hmm. Can we all agree on the 5-second, minimum 5-second rule? Maybe that's one we write down, Jody, just to check that off so we have to talk about it again.
I don't believe so. I think every LED board that has come before the Planning Commission, even previously to this board, has been included a 5-second interval.
So that's one we can agree on. One is the time that it dims. Should we specify the time, or did you say we can't do that, Rick?
It'd be tough to do. I think Mr. Harrell just said it's whether you call it a
Yeah,
photo sense or electronic eye. It's basically going to be sensed by how much sun or daylight versus.
Yeah.
And
Just
that's
the
gonna
daylight, wouldn't you?
All right,
Okay.
we'll put down regulated by sensor. And if the sensor's broken, it's got to be turned off. All right. Is that good? If the sensor's inoperable.
I don't know about a sensor being broken and the sign being turned off.
just
I don't know how, I mean,
Worst case
You
scenario.
can capture this in the language that's going to come back to us,
Yeah.
and we can bat it
Perfect.
around more. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a good first step in kind of throwing ideas out here.
Is there a way to measure the brightness of a sign?
we're going to look into the lumens and that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a slippery slope, but yes, there's several different ways that it can be argued. So
It can only advertise the property on site and the businesses if it's a multi-business unit. Is that
yeah, that to me seems very
Fair.
logical. Yeah.
So
We have signs shall only advertise for the use or uses of the parcel, only because there have been LED boards that have been permitted in multi-units, so you would have to have several different types of uses. Of course, within that multi-unit could be advertised, but that multi-unit couldn't advertise for the neighboring if they were having a sale, per se.
Another thing that I brought up to Jody before, I got a few complaints to me, and of course I saw it myself, is actual political advertising. I don't think that should be permitted. If we've got an ordinance that says it must be limited to the use of the property, it's got to be that business use, and I think that should be in there, that no political advertising included in those. You're looking at Marty.
I said we're all looking at Marty. Political signs, I'm going to look at Marty.
Well, I guess I'm wondering, maybe there's a political office in the series of units.
If it's a headquarter owned by the political office, that would be part of the business use.
Okay.
But if it's not owned or leased by the political party, then
But I think that by notating that it should be only advertised for the use of the parcel, I don't know if we want to get specific and say maybe no political advertising unless it's on that use of the property.
Well, I think that article I sent you talked about that, what you can and can't regulate. And one thing you can't regulate as a township is content. You can regulate other things, size of the sign, frequency of light, but you can't regulate speech. So if there is an office there, he could probably, hey, that's my business. And he should be able to do that.
I would say if the office was on the parcel,
Yeah.
then I would say yes. I don't believe that was,
but you're saying the political office is on the parcel.
that the political office would have to be
Right.
within that multi-unit. I know how they lease different structures. If they were in that multi-unit or on the parcel, then it would be that use on that parcel. So I would say yes. However, if it was another facility advertising and just for support of a political party, then I would say no, then it would have to be
And it's
removed.
not just a party, it's parties, causes, et cetera.
Right.
I mean,
Et cetera.
I know you've got some freedom of speech there, but you can advertise freedom of speech in other ways. I mean, if we're gonna be able to limit what's gonna be on the sign, even of a business, then to me, you got to be able to limit other things as well. Other than that, how can you limit anything? You just say you put whatever you want on that sign. So you got
So
to
are we kind of agreeing for that the sign shall only advertise for the use or uses of the parcel?
Of the businesses on the parcel.
of the business owner or lessee of the property. What do you think about that?
And we can correct it and then we'll go back over them again, just so we can get some better clarification of the language.
Yeah, because I've had multiple people tell me, and I've seen it, multiple churches in our area have the Proposal 3 big old signs out front. Is that allowed currently? Not that I have an opinion either way or stating an opinion. It just seems off to me that churches would be able to put that out in front of their facility.
What kind of sign?
It's the Proposal 3 that's coming up in the election. It's the abortion one, but they have big, large signs out in front of the church.
Nothing-
St. Anthony Church.
Nothing digital. You're talking
nothing
about a
digital.
permanent or a
Yes, you're
You're not talking about the LED sign, you're
Yeah.
talking about just a standalone.
A standard.
like-
I thought that's what we were
like
talking
a-
about.
No, and that's
No,
going to be
that
your
we're
freedom of
talking
speech
about
laws
this
right
being on
there.
the.
I suggest we stick with LED for right
Yeah, it's
now.
the
We'll go on to
LED.
that next. One other thing, I was wondering if we could put a max sign of 4 by 8, 48 inches by 96 inches for the LED portion. It seems to be the common large sign that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I
I
agree
will
with it.
say that restricting the size of the signs, we're going to get into a lot of, because when you get into the sign ordinance, each section of the zoning ordinance then refers to that. We cannot amend language within the overlay districts. Those are only allowed to be 4-foot overall height. So if we're making a determination of the sign size, I guess I'm going to ask Mr. Camprath, what about all the signs that are already existing? Would they just be then grandfathered in? If they make a change, they have to come into compliance?
That's right.
They're grandfathered in.
But if they make a change, it has to come into compliance. So then they'd have to take all their signs down that are over those requirements.
Yeah, we've taken too long to do this.
I'm just saying we have to be careful when we start making more restrictive changes because we have so many of them in the community already. If then they make a change to the sign, then they have to bring it into compliance. They may be grandfathered in, but another one of my suggestions is a 7-year contract because that becomes an issue, and I believe that the commission may want to take long discussion of maybe eliminating the 7-year contract. And either you comply or you ask for a waiver. So once we get into this further, that I think that if we start restricting the sizes other than what's already permitted by ordinance, I don't have a problem with, I know I spoke with Mr. Harold about allowing maybe a 1-foot base and then an overall height of 7 feet. So when snow and that is pushed up against it, I know a lot of people try to keep their landscaping so that snow and that is not against their message boards, but maybe allowing maybe a little bit overall taller in height to accommodate that. But I think if we start restricting a specific portion of the sign to that square footage, each section, PBO is only permitted 40 square feet. Commercial is permitted 50 square feet. So you would be restricting all of those with specifying a specific portion of the sign.
It's interesting. I was looking at the monument sign waivers we've granted in the last couple of years, and it's spread out. There's one that was C1, there's an R3, R2A, another R3,
Yes.
An overlay district. You know, it's like we're rubber stamping these anyway. I don't think we've turned anybody down. So I'm just saying I don't know that an LED sign needs to be bigger than this. You know, someone's going to come in, they're going to have a 64 square foot sign. And it's like, no, the ordinance says this is plenty. And if you want to say, all right, 32 square feet in a commercial and maybe 24 square feet in a residential, or maybe we always should be looking at sign requests in residential.
Well, if you go to the portion where it breaks them down in the use district, in R1 through an RT, which is all the single family, those are monument signs. And that's why I say we don't allow LED message boards when you permit them in other than residential, non-residential uses. They wouldn't be permitted an LED message board and they'd only be permitted 32. Only because once we put an LED board in a residential subdivision, well, I want my garage sale on the message board. And I think the Planning Commission would open a lot of problems for developers or associations by allowing message boards in a residential development type use. And then if you go into...
Let me ask you this. Is there like a minimum size that would be allowed for an LED sign?
Well, PBO is allowed 40 square feet in area. C1, commercial is allowed 50. I1 is allowed 50, and I1 is actually allowed 2 standing. I2 is 50 square feet. Basically, everyone is 50 except in a PBO, and that's because it's a professional business office. It normally is either a standalone structure, and the structures tend to be smaller for lawyers, attorneys, legal, tax representation. There's a usually smaller structure, so the size of the sign is smaller.
So maybe for the PBOs, we can put a smaller restriction in, and for commercial, leave that one at the what is it, 4 by 8, 32 square feet, just for the LED portion, not the stuff built up around it.
Well, I'm saying though that the one we just approved is more than 32 square feet for a PBO, and if they make a change to that, they'd have to come in, should that be the desire of the board, they'd have to come in and ask for a sign waiver to allow that board to remain for any of the ones that you've already approved. They may be grandfathered in to remain as they exist, but any changes, they would have to come into compliance.
And they should.
Maybe we should have know what the largest sign we've already allowed is in each of those things and kind of set that as the limit.
It looks like 32 square feet of LED is the largest. 4 by 8.
The square feet you're talking about, Jody, is that just the LED portion or is that the entire sign?
The sign part, yes.
The illuminated part. That's because Mr. Harrell said they come in panels, and that's how they snap together.
Stepping down from 48, 30, 4 by 8, what's the next?
Well, each manufacturer's a little bit different, but kind of the industry standard is 1 foot tall by 2 foot wide is how the panels are generally designed.
But commonly used in, what are you saying?
Typically, what we recommend is a proportion of like a television, 2 to 1. So for every, I'm sorry, it would be, in essence, it would be, for an 8 foot, we would recommend a 4 foot.
3, 6, 4, 8.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm seeing some 4 by 8s. Here's one that is
The one we approved tonight,
3.
how big was the LED screen?
What would be
4 by 8?
3 by 8? That's another common.
Yeah, 3 by 8 and 4 by 8 are probably the most popular.
Okay. That's what
Anything smaller than that, it becomes a little challenging to read, to get the message across. I think it makes sense for everyone. When you do get, I understand where you're going with the getting too large, and I'm all for that. But if you get too small, then it becomes a little challenging to read, which could cause another issue that we're trying to avoid to begin with. So I agree with Jody. I think you're creating, I think I would stick with the square footage as it is and let the sign company design the sign how their customer wants it. If they're allowed 40 square feet, then they know they've got 40 square feet to work within, including the digital and the sign above it. I think you're complicating things by putting words in there that we're going to work around as best we can anyways. So I think the 40 and 50 square feet, that's just what I've done. I've maxed out what I could do based on the square footage allowed. And it's up to my customer at that point, one, financially, do they want to spend the amount of money that it takes to fill that 50 square feet of digital? Then, that's up to them at that point. And I always recommend that they should have their name on the sign, including the digital, because if not, you're kind of eliminating the purpose of having a sign. I don't think the sign should just be digital. I think it needs to announce what their company is. That's a permanent sign, and that's why whatever I've proposed has always had their name above it or next to it or whatever. That's stationary.
Does everyone on the board feel that anybody who wants an LED sign should get one? Or should they have to keep coming here for permission?
I would say that if it's going to fit into the ordinance and the current rules in place, what we're talking about here is not extreme to allow, again, some of the things as you pointed out that we continue to say okay to is the changing of the sign, the dimming of the signs, dimming at dusk, things like that. Those are pretty straightforward, and as long as everything else fits and the square footage fits, I mean, that seems to be the other big thing is a lot of times it's the square footage that they're exceeding. Now, that's a different ballgame. Then they would have to come and get their waivers. Other than that, I think if they're fitting within the square footage
And the height.
and in the height requirements, I think that should be something that through the amendment of the ordinance and planning can approve those.
Agreed.
Mr. Fritz.
Yes, to the chair, to Jody. Jody, is there any reason why we couldn't make a handout with all the stuff that goes along with the permit? So the person knows all this stuff up front and the sign company does too? Is that coming later?
The website is available to everybody.
Yeah.
It has all the requirements. And if anybody needs it, we always send that over via email, or if they can come pick it up, and we try to break it down as best we can so they understand what's required.
But if that was part of the permit, then they couldn't later say, I didn't know that. If it was,
Well, they can't get a permit without the planning department signing off on the sign.
Okay.
Mhm. They have to submit to us for review and approval, and then we sign off on it, and then it goes to the building department
so all that stuff is already known to them.
before it
that
goes to
we're
the planning
putting in.
or the building department for a permit. Yes.
Yeah.
It's in there.
Well, I have no problem with that, letting them oversee that if they have all that information we've been talking about, which they do, but make sure that the homeowner has that, or the company.
It'll
And
be
then-
clear in the ordinance.
Yeah, and then on the O, where you got to be removed, no flashing, as far as I'm concerned, that can be gone.
Yeah, that has to be removed if we're
Yeah.
going to allow the
So,
message.
I'm just saying, if you're asking for
Yes.
permission or
Mhm.
whatever, that can be gone. And that bottom part, except for time and temperature, they could be used. They would not be moving, though. at
I would
night.
not be removing that because
Right.
there are some locations that just have time and temperature, such as banks.
And would
that's
that be
permitted.
moving?
Mhm.
That would be moving too. That would be moving time and temperature.
Nope, just has time and temperature on
good.
it. Yep, there's no moving or oscillating. It's
So-
solid time and temperature. Most of the times you'll see that on a bank sign.
So if that's the last one on that page, I mean, if everybody's happy, we can turn the page.
Well, I'm going to refer to R because there is where it says, no sign shall contain banners, posters, balloons, or pennants. I think we should look at the pennant portion within the temporary signs. We've had a lot of inquiries of new businesses coming in, and we allow a temporary sign, 2-week increments, $15 for every 2 weeks. I would like the commission to maybe take into consideration allowing, still requiring a permit, but allowing a temporary sign such as a grand opening sign until the permanent sign, and giving them 30 days of such nature, of that type, because we've had a lot of inquiries of grand opening signs, new business starting, and they can't get their sign made for 30 days, and they have no sign. I'm sure you see them going up, and we are complaint-based, so I would like that to be at least taken in consideration, but it does say the pennants, and the board should take that into consideration as a temporary sign, because we have them everywhere in the township. The flag signs that are all over are not permitted by ordinance. I don't know what the desires are of the commission, but if the desire is to continue to allow businesses to put them up, I would request that maybe they can have one we get multi-units, we have 20 out with different facilities on them. That is something that would, of the section of the ordinance that I would like the commission to take a look at, because when you get them up and they don't take them down and they become dilapidated and ripped and torn, I believe there should be something in the ordinance that allows ordinance enforcement to go and take it down.
Okay, what do you
We're
guys
going
think
to-
about pennant signs?
That's going to be in R and then under temporary signs as well.
And you're talking about the long ones, right? The big tall ones that's
Flag,
on a stick
what do
and
you call
it's
them?
flipping all around.
And so that goes with letter D, the community event and special event commercial signs, such as grand openings or special events for businesses. Those have been inquiries to our department anyways. They're not seeking sign waivers on them. But we only allow them 4 times a year, 2-week increments, and it's $15 for every 2 weeks. But I would like to have maybe some consideration for a grand opening sign or a special event sign on a parcel that's having a sale or of that nature that could put up a temporary sign. Majority of the time I look at it is for a grand opening before they can get their permanent sign. So I would like the commission to take at least some consideration into looking at that portion of the ordinance.
So, if I could, Jody, if you were recommending some language when you say consider it, what can you get more specific? Like, Based on what you've
Specifically,
seen.
I would like it at least to address grand openings till a permanent sign could be designed and installed, such as maybe 30 days. I think 30 days is hard pressed for sign companies, but I think there should be a time frame on it, because we do allow, they could have a special event sign and pay the 2 weeks for the $15 for a special event or a sale of that nature. But I think for grand opening for a new business, sometimes it does take time for them to get their signs, and we don't allow grand opening signs.
I wouldn't have a problem. I agree. I think 30 days is fair, especially if it's a grand opening. And then again, if it's a special event, do your 2-week permits. I think that's really
a
pretty.
typical sign to produce is a 4 to 6 week window. Unless it's something extremely extraordinary. I would say 4 to 6 weeks is a realistic production time.
I mean, and maybe if you had the language that it must be kept in good order, because if it tears or something, you don't want that hanging. So it must be kept in good order, and not having tears and frays in it. And I'd even be able to say 6 weeks is fine, up to 6 weeks, especially again if it's a grand opening.
And I would still like a permit required for that.
Yeah, do the permit.
Yeah, that way we can follow up with it if it's not replaced or taken down within the 6-week time frame.
Right.
Letter V. I'm just going to try to keep moving forward and get some consideration on these. But letter V, no part of the sign shall be located higher than the lowest point of the roof attached to the wall of the building where the sign is located. We've had a few of these. You will have one coming to you. Prime example is over where the liquor cabinet is on Secor Road. They have a parapet wall. It's above the roof line of the building. And those all had to come for a sign waiver. I believe Food Town, some of the older structures that you'll find, Food Town in downtown Temperance is above the roof line. Anything where a sign would have to be above the roof line has to require a sign waiver by ordinance. I'm not proposing any language change if the desire of the board. I'm just giving some sections that we've had sign waivers. The W, all freestanding signs shall be landscaped around the perimeter of the base no less than 2 feet wide, and said landscaping shall be kept and maintained growing in a healthy condition. My only comments on that section for the board to take into consideration is what is landscaping? Some people say the stone is landscaping. Are we looking at bushes to keep them growing in healthy condition, or a mulch? Or should it just say some type of landscaping 2 feet wide? There's plenty of signs we have that don't have landscaping, but they put it in and it just doesn't survive, and so they just don't replant it. So that's a consideration if we want to just amend it as landscaping, that the base of the sign must be landscaped around the perimeter of the base, at least 2 feet.
Because I know sometimes where signs are positioned, they don't necessarily have good irrigation. So obviously that's going to be a problem with keeping, small shrubs or flowers and plants around there. I think, a decorative landscaping of, again, whether it's, mulch, stone, bushes, excuse me, whatever the applicant, is going to put around it. I think we're probably pretty good there.
Yeah.
But it must be there, though. It's not an option.
And I like that language, maybe decorative landscaping such as mulch, stone, plantings.
Right.
And maybe require that if they have to come in, some type of landscape showing what at least they're going to install. That wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, at least maybe provide a rendering to the planning department.
With the submittal.
And as a sign company, that's a little challenging because, again, we don't do landscaping. So
Right.
we can sit here and propose what
that's
it's
the
going to
applicant's
look
problem,
like.
though.
Yeah.
I mean, you do the sign, and that's the applicant's problem to do the rest.
But I do like the language of a decorative landscape, some type of landscape. I still think it should be landscaped underneath and not just grass growing, because then it's not maintained at all. But I do like the language of that.
And Jody, just to interrupt real quick, and
Sure.
I do have to tell the board, I do have an obligation at 9:30 that I have to be on a conference call so I will have to wrap by 9:30 myself if you continue on the conversation.
And I'll just say, I think we're pretty close of going, the political signs, we're going to have to work with legal, because I don't know, we have some language that restricts political signs, But I think that that's going to be something, I don't know if we have to change what we have to allow additional, or.
The question I would have there, can we restrict how long they can be up, like pre-election, 30-day prior?
I think
or
there
something?
is something within the clerk's department that's handed out that does restrict the time frame. I think it's,
I can clarify that, Jody.
go ahead.
It's there, but it's not enforceable.
Yeah, I believe
somebody-
the state controls that.
If somebody wants to put a sign out 60 days in
Difficult.
advance, 90 days in advance, you cannot stop that.
I think it's difficult, especially on individual residential lots.
Correct.
Freedom of speech with that.
Now, granted, you can't just go stick one on the corner because you
Right.
felt like it. You must still have permission of that property owner to have that sign, or the property owner has to put it up themselves.
I'm going to kind of skip a little farther into number 8. This is I think, one of the important sections. This is where 7-year contract becomes somewhat problematic in the future for additional signage or changes. I would like the commission to take into consideration eliminating the 7-year contract, other than those that are already in existence, and that the sign either complies or they seek a variance for a sign waiver, because I would like to see this also go to the BZA. Then the LED boards won't become so much of a problematic or discussion of the 5-second intervals. They would either comply with the ordinance, or within 300 feet of the perimeter of the property would be notified that they were requesting a waiver. Right now it comes to the township, the planning commission, and there is no public hearing for it. But I believe that if you're asking for a waiver from the requirements of the ordinance, I believe it should go to the BZA, and that is the Board of Zoning Appeals. That is a variance quasi-judicial board that allows them to make, put conditions, requirements, and variances from the requirements of the ordinance. So that is something else I would like the commission to take into consideration. This being, I believe, Marty, you can correct me, but before my time, at one time was at the BZA, and I wasn't here. It's always been at the BZA since I've been part of the township.
Yeah, really, a variance can only, to a township zoning ordinance, is only authorized by the Board of Zoning Appeals. When this new sign ordinance was put in place in the early 2000s or late 2000s, I'm not sure, there was some consternation about the dramatic changes that the township was making to sign requirements. And they thought, well, maybe we should have a little temporarily, some wiggle room to let some people get some not variance, but a waiver of these conditions. Well, there's really not, the term waiver is not supported by the Zoning Enabling Act of Michigan, only variances. So it would be proper and appropriate to, since this is a zoning ordinance, that we comply with the Zoning Enabling Act, and any changes or modifications or anything less than what's required by the ordinance would be construed as a variance and approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals, and that would require a showing of unique circumstances, and otherwise you comply with the ordinance. Right now, it's just come in for a waiver, and because it looks good or it doesn't hurt anybody, doesn't appear to be harmful. So those are not the standards which, in fact, we even have in the ordinance, and the Board of Zoning Appeals better, I guess, in place to handle those questions.
I think to Mr. Camper's point there too, and again to one of his colleagues, one of his favorite terms is quasi-judicial body, and that's what he classifies the Board of Zoning Appeals. That body actually has the most government regulatory power in the township when it comes to variances. Township board cannot override the Board of Zoning Appeals variance. This commission cannot override the Board of Zoning Appeals variances. They are a regulatory body. So again, I think it's a good place to put those issues. If it's not in compliance with the ordinance, then it moves on to the Board of Zoning Appeals for either a variance or a denial to follow the ordinance as it's spelled out.
Well, that's all I have regarding it. If anybody else has any comments, we can amend those, or you can, if you have any comments you'd like me to add for the next meeting, email them over, and then I can at least put them in the packet for everybody to at least have a little idea of what the thoughts are, and I can even attach the emails to show what the comments were from, who they were from.
Even if you guys agree, just send her an email letting her know that.
The one concern
Harrell?
that I've had in the past, I don't know if the ordinance has changed, but I think we've touched base on it, is I've had to come in to get variances on the, I believe it's under multi-tenant.
I think it's RME, and I have it highlighted. I just kind of skipped that portion for tonight, discussion tonight, because I know Mr. Steiner has to leave, and I didn't know if the commission had any. But I do have, it's multiple housing.
Yeah, that one is, that's a silly ordinance that needs to be.
It's 25 feet from the road right-of-way. However, in most instances right now, the road commission is requiring an additional 27-foot highway utility easement, so the signs are already being pushed back. But it is something that we should take a look at, and I do have it highlighted. I just didn't. It's one of the easier fixes in the ordinance.
Because I know I've been here for 3 or 4
and we did talk about it.
So Jody, real quick, the other ones in the
highlighted is
50 feet, all highlighted. What's the point there? You want good, bad, like it, more, less?
I don't have a problem because majority of the signs are that. I just wanted to make sure that if we were making any changes, because it was discussed about changing the size of the LED boards and the request of the 7-foot in height, maybe allowing a 1-foot height variance in an overall. So it would be an overall 8-foot height and sign, only a 1-foot base, 7 feet in height, and then the signage would have to be within that. But those are what's required as of today, if there was any desire to change the requirements.
Okay, anything else? Have a good evening, Mr. Steiner.
Okay, thank you.
All right, item 9, public comment, and I'm really sorry you had to wait all this time, but please go ahead and state your name and address for the record.
Carmen Kuzno, Crab Road, Temperance. I'd like to go back to when Mr. Gyrick brought the property from the Rose. They sold part of it.
I'm going to interrupt you. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, it won't take that long.
Okay.
They sold part of it to the Erie Storage, part of it to a doctor and his wife, which is the 20 acres we own now. The doctor died, and the wife inherited the property. She wanted to build a house on there, but because it was on the 100-year floodplain, she was only allowed to build part of it. So she couldn't build it where she wanted to, so she asked us if we wanted to buy it because we had been farming it. So we said yes, we would buy it. So we own that now. So because of what happened here tonight, you're telling me that with our 20-some acres that we have there, if we decide we want to put that to industrial, we won't have any problem. If Erie Storage would want to buy that and expand their storage, there would be no problem. We could change that from ag to industrial without any problem. Is that what you're saying here tonight, that we can do that, that ag can be changed that easily?
You're allowed to make comments. We can't respond, or so.
Well, I know everybody's mind was made up before tonight.
It wasn't.
Because nothing we said made any difference. It was only about the water. And there was a lot more to it than the water. But I just wanted to say that this lady had to sell it because she couldn't build a house because it was in the 100-year floodplain. And that's when the Planning Commission was in Monroe. It went from Bedford to Monroe back then. And so that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Ron Kuzno, Crab Road. Well, one thing, Kuzno Family Farms has been there since 1836, same year the Bedford Township. But anyway, this lock it up thing, they're going to build that. It don't sound like it's going to do the township any good for tax money because it don't stay in the township. And they've got one employee, and that's all they're going to have when they get all this done, one employee. So it's not helping Bedford Township very damn much. Thank you.
I'd like to say something also about the footprint.
Can you lower the microphone?
I'd like to say something about the footprint, and maybe you guys can get a handle on the visual of this. 20 acres. Right now they're at 5.4 build out completely, and it's all solid urbanization. It goes into a retention pond, and that pond meters out the water in 24 hours. That water is that volume, still goes into the ditch. We get erosion. We are only 3/4 of a mile from the stream. The stream gets flooded with dirt, and it kills all the fish and everything else in it because there's a lack of oxygen. The other thing is that you take this footprint. It's in a huge hazardous floodplain. The entire thing. It isn't just a 100-year floodplain. Look at FEMA's map. You have blue. Then look at the rest of Bedford Township. How much of all of Bedford Township is in that blue? Only where the streams are. But this is covering these fields. These fields are seriously used. And what happens when we have snowpack? Okay? What happened in the Midwest just a few years back when it flooded? You're not even thinking. When we have snowpack, in 2014, the lakes froze the deepest they've ever froze in history. We had, just on our farm, snowdrifts from plowing out our driveway that were as tall as our service barn that houses our combines. That is over 25 feet. Okay? That's how tall the snowdrift was from our driveway. Where are they going to put their snow from this 20 acres? Into the retention ponds. It's going to sit there. And then we're going to have freezing, and we're going to have thawing, and we're going to have overbanking. And what happens in overbanking? This isn't just a 100-year event anymore. They lowered the level when they bellied it out and they built those mounds. They lowered it. It's even 2 feet lower. They have to bring in soil to go 1 foot above the floodplain. That would be 3 feet of dirt right now on that entire property. That's how much. And then, do they get a setback again? No, because you just made it I. They don't have a setback like they had before. The PUD is gone. And let me talk about the footprint one more time. Let's put your head around this one. I mapped it out, entered the evidence in Google Maps, took the perimeter of this property, which is going to be 100% surface. This property could house Michigan tube swedgers and road alloy, and you still have some room to spare. It almost housed the tire factory. That's how big it is. Why did we make industrial parks? Why is that in our planning? Because people put these kind of properties up with this much impervious surfaces need to go in an industrial park or into mixed-use properties that can manage it. And there is bounds of empty mixed-use properties, and there is empty land in the industrial thing. If they had came to you in 2005 and you were sitting on the board and they said, let's take this 20 acres and let me put Michigan Tube and road alloy there, who actually employ people in this township. Michigan Tube is the largest employer next to the school district. And they still aren't big as this is. This is what you're just not even looking at. You're not looking at the flood maps. When you do things like that, you eliminate and then you put no value on what is a flood plain. And the floodplain that sits there holds the water.
I'm sorry, 3 minutes is up. You have 3 minutes. You got to get to the point.
The point? The point is you didn't consider any of the other properties of this. You just want to, just because something can be built doesn't mean it should be.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak?
Is my 3 minutes up? Yes. Okay.
Seeing no other people that like to speak, going on to item 10, information. Any next meeting?
Yes, I would like everyone to take into consideration, we are coming into the holiday season, and right now we will be having a meeting tentatively on the 26th of this month. The next meeting then would be November 9th, if we have any items, but I would like to move the November 23rd meeting, the day before Thanksgiving, to the November 16th, if you could check your agendas to see if you're available. And then the other one would be, I'm looking to just have the one meeting in December, the regular meeting on the 14th, and then if we can move all the items, otherwise the second meeting is the 28th. We try to condense those, as we know a lot of people have things going on for the holiday season. I try to keep them all closer to one meeting, or change the dates and have two meetings still in a month.
Jody, I will be out of town December 14th.
On November?
No, you said December 14th.
Oh, the December 14th meeting, okay.
I might be also.
Okay.
Is that the second or third?
That's the,
that's
the
Wednesday?
Yeah, it's the Wednesday.
Did you have a date after 26? before November 16th?
I had the regular meeting was the 23rd, and I'm looking to change it if we need to. Only if there are items ready, I will not schedule a meeting to change it. We would be having November 9th or November 16th is the date I'm looking to change the 23rd from.
November 9th is what I didn't have.
Yes.
Thanks.
So Jody, real quick, since we're talking about it, I'm traveling October 26th and November 16th. I'm
Okay.
gone.
Thank you. And I'll send an email out too, just so we all have, because Rick won't know the date changes either. So I will send an email to update those as well.
Okay.
But other than that, thank you all for a good discussion tonight, and have a good evening.
Any comments, Mr. Lamkowski?
I'm good.
Mr. Shank? Ron, or excuse me, Mr. Helm?
I'm good.
I have nothing. Mr. Fritz? Ms. Covrat?
Nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just passing around a plan for Ord, if you guys could sign it before you leave tonight.
Okay. Mr. Camprith? Nothing. Jody, nothing?
I have nothing else.
Okay, and we are adjourned. It is 9:37. Thank you.
Thank you.